How you doing, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the podcast to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. And this time around, past really means past. As far as how I'm doing, yesterday we had some weirdly, symbolic moments in it. Like there was this moment when I got an email ad from Musician's Friend because it's microphone month, and I had all these mic deals, and I clicked through and I started looking at all of these mics that were on sale, and I was thinking about the setup that I used to record in-person podcasts and how maybe I could upgrade this, that, and the other. And it took 2 or 3 pages of click-throughs before I thought to myself, you are not going to be recording an in-person podcast for quite a while, Gil. There's really no point in looking at this sort of stuff, and unless it's meant to represent something about hope for the future, I guess. But there'll be other mic months ahead. In the evening, I watched a chunk of Soderbergh's adaptation of Solaris, the Stanislaw Lem novel, which I've read a bunch of times over the years and maybe due for another rereading. It's an interesting book. The movie, it's pretty good, but, gets a little too trippy at times, and takes the central conceit, which is a space station orbiting planet that might be intelligent in and of itself, but cannot communicate with humans, bringing the humans on the space station a person from their past. It's a weird thing, but essentially these ghosts show up on the station and think they're who they are from the humans' memories. Anyway, what I think the book is ultimately about is the impossibility of communication, not just between people and the planet, but between people. And the movie gets at some of that. But anyway, there's this moment where George Clooney's character, Kelvin, has a dream of the one scientist who killed himself shortly before Clooney arrives at the station, telling him, or maybe it's the planet speaking through this phantasm in his dream, there are no answers, only choices. And that struck me as weirdly appropriate for the moment we're going through right now, trying to find a guiding or organizing metaphor for all of this stuff, trying to find a framework that attaches a structure to it all, or provides some sort of answer, is not exactly where we are right now. While I was making coffee this morning, I thought about how long it's been since I've written one of my poems, which, well, I refer to as Haiku for Business Travelers, which is also the title of the zine that I keep promising to make. I don't know who I'm promising it to, but while I was making the coffee, I thought about how long it's been since I've written one of those, and then I thought about how outmoded the very idea of Haiku for Business Travelers is, because there's no business travel. So now it's essentially as outdated as the idea of my doing a zine. So everything comes together full circle is what I'm saying. Sorry for doing all this rambling, but it's the weekend and you don't have anything else to do. The other thing I did yesterday was every 2 weeks I send out a follow-up / query to all of the past guests who haven't responded yet about being part of this series. And tell them, how I'm doing, how things are going, ask how they're doing, and then see if they're interested in doing this. And I got a couple of takers this morning. So given that there will be plenty of potential days ahead to fill with conversation, I am happy to say that there are many past guests of the show who look like they're going to be coming on sometime soon to talk about how they're doing. All of which brings us to today's conversation. Author and stand-up comic Jane Borden is joining me this time around from L.A. Jane was actually one of my very first guests of the podcast back in 2012, but we haven't really stayed in touch since then. So besides her life in lockdown, we had some catching up to do. Jane had a pretty funny essay collection. I totally meant to do that. which is what we talked about back in 2012. And nowadays she contributes to a bunch of print and online magazines, including Vanity Fair, O. Henry, and a few others, all of which you can find at janeborden.com, which I'll give you a link for when we get to the end of the episode. Now, as caveats go, she's using the internal mic on her computer, so it's okay. And in the intervening 7+ years since we last spoke, she had a child who I think tries to open the door and check in on her mom during the conversation. You can hear some creaking in the background every so often. I'm assuming it's her kid. Anyway, here's me and Jane. So how are you dealing?
Okay. All things considered, we're fine. But it's very stressful and strange.
Where are you located?
We're in Los Angeles now.
In general, not your exact address. Okay. Because I need to see this on Google Maps.
Just look for the huge rusted RV camper that's always parked in front of our house. That's what you get for having a shady front.
That's something. So how was the transition for LA? I've only visited a few times. I mean, the transition with self-ISO and everything else. It's always been my 3 or 4 visits there have been, driving heavy. It doesn't seem like it's the sort of place you just go walking out to the supermarket or something. How tough a transition has this been?
Well, it's been very good for the air quality. That's for sure. And I have been thinking about how infrequently I walked around my neighborhood before. Of course, now we're sort of just trolling the same, 3-block circle 3 times a day. Yeah. I feel like I'm patrolling the neighborhood. I'm either the problem or the police. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, she's casing the joint. And you're wearing a face mask at the time. At least here in New Jersey, you're supposed to do that.
Yes, so, with the...
just makes you look more suspicious.
Exactly. It's...
Yeah, did you have a stylish one, or are you just with the basic face mask?
Oh, they're stylish. My in-laws have some friends who are sending them out, and one has superheroes on it. One has mustaches on it, which is the one that fits me. So I like that. My child, however, is really upset that she doesn't have one yet. So we've ordered one that's going to have pink mermaids on it because, of course, it is.
Match, yeah.
and then we'll match.
Now, it's been 8 years since we recorded. And in fact, as I can't remember if I mentioned to you, you are the very first guest I ever had on the show who was not like friend or family.
Oh.
Like you were the first person I had not ever met before sitting down at the table with. Now it's old hat for me, but it was one of those, like, looking back, I'm like, oh my God, that was the first time I sat down with someone I'd never had a conversation with beforehand. And I thought it went pretty well, but 2012, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago is like ancient history. So 2012 is way back there. But what are the years been for you? How's the past decade gone? I know it sounds like we're old relationship people who are catching up a million years later, but how are the past, you mentioned the kid, which seems pretty significant.
Lots of transitions. I feel like I had settled into an independent New York life, and since then, it's no longer my life; it's our life, which has been a healthy transition for me. But I left New York. I got married, and we moved to Sewanee, Tennessee.
That's familiar. I think that was in process when we recorded.
Yes. And that was an adventure. It's a beautiful part of the world. I've been thinking about it lately because it would be a lovely place to be quarantined, especially in the spring. But there's a small university. And so my husband had a 2-year visiting position there. And then we came to Los Angeles, which was a little bit unexpected, but has been a lot of fun. And I left my staff position in New York, my magazine job, for the world of freelance, which has been great. I write for Vanity Fair and the Washington Post, and I'm still working on the proposal for another book. It keeps changing shape. That's the thing about memoir, is that it keeps happening. It's always happening.
I think we're all seeing now that time just keeps blending and melting on us.
Yes. Yes. The melting is, I looked around our tiny house the other day and I thought, how is it so filthy already? Again, we just swept. And Nathan was like, Jane, that was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And I've been really good about not having the days melting into each other thing, but a day or two ago, no, I think it was over the weekend, I woke up and thought, am I in another country? Like, I literally couldn't remember if I'd gone traveling somewhere and was in a hotel room in another country and time zone.
Wow.
And I thought, no, this is home in New Jersey, Gil. And I'm really good about not having that. I'm very, reified and concrete about this stuff. But yeah, that was one of those, just waking up and not really knowing where and when it was.
That's so interesting that your subconscious had you traveling.
Yeah. And that was a big chunk of my day job, was going to trade shows and other stuff. And it's one of those things where all of us are just home. And, I was talking with one of the guys I've known 20 plus years in the field I work in by day. And we were both marveling over all the things we took for granted about how we did business. Everything's gone. And just, in a snap, that all that stuff. We were even talking about trade shows. His company's like, yeah, I don't think we're going anywhere till fall of next year.
Wow.
We don't think it's going to be safe to travel for another 18 months. I'm like, okay, that's good to know, because you work in the pharmaceutical industry and know what's being developed.
Right.
So yeah, it's just kind of freaky as far as that stuff's concerned. But most recently in Vanity Fair, you did a piece on the art of making art about a plague.
Yes.
So, I'm blanking on the name of the person you were profiling in that piece, which means I'm a heel.
No, I interviewed a historian named Jennifer Wright, who has written a book about plagues, in past plagues. And we had such an interesting conversation. Writing that piece somehow gave me some solace about what's happening now. I think turning to history tends to do that. Those we're still here after all of the plagues that have come before, made me feel some of that solace that comes from deep time. But yeah, there definitely are patterns in the way artists respond to these kinds of pandemics. And it was very interesting to speak with her about that.
I know you talk primarily in terms of memoir and essay and such. Do you look at writing about this, or creating fiction around this yourself?
I've certainly thought about it. It's only now, after 4.5 weeks, that I'm starting to really feel the effects of what's happening. It was so novel. Definitely no pun intended there. In the beginning, that it was really almost like I was still living my old life and just kind of imagining this new life. And now, I was just telling Nathan this morning, I feel I've gotten very accustomed to working at night. I used to hate to work at night, but now, of course, we have a child to manage all day, and it's just become a routine. And I was struck by that, and it made me wonder, what are all the other little ways I've adjusted that I haven't noticed yet, but that I will.
Have you had trouble explaining what's going on to your kid, or she's still young enough that this is all just, part of the flow that children have to deal with?
I don't know that she gets it fully, but she's been fine. Fortunately, she's really taken to FaceTime playdates in a way that a lot of my friends' children are not. And so I'm very thankful for that. She's on one right now. She has these like epic 2-hour playdates every afternoon, which is the first time that my husband and I have a chance to, eat.
Yeah.
Although he's been teaching classes over Zoom, so I get to overhear him teaching Othello 3 times a day, which I love.
Have you figured out your best Zoom angles, or do you have any Zoom meetings that you have to do, or are you pretty much able to avoid it?
I have avoided Zoom meetings, blessedly. I have been having some Zoom or FaceTime hangouts and cocktails. And there was one time that I put on mascara just for me.
Oh, I'm hip. Trust me. The moment I can start putting on suits again, I'll be ecstatic. I'm ready to just wallop everybody in the suit game. I can, if I ever get back to having business meetings and see, I'm debating just doing it in the house, because apparently that's Robert Caro's thing, the guy who's doing the mega biography of Lyndon Johnson. He puts on a suit, goes into his home office and writes, because the suit is the signal that,
right.
I'm at
right.
work now. That's
well, I in my very early 30s, I very briefly worked for Tom Wolfe, helping him organize his archives, which was so fun. Down in the basement of his Upper East Side apartment, I got to flip through his notebook for the right stuff. Just really cool. But he, he didn't do the full spats every day, but he was very dressed up just to walk into his office in his apartment.
Yeah. It's like a pal of mine who interviewed the Ramones. I think it was Joey Ramone back in the 90s. He said, so like when you and your girlfriend are out shopping, at the supermarket, it's like, yeah, she pushes the shopping cart. Like, I'm Joey Ramone. I can't be seen doing, this. So you still have to live up to some sort of public image, even in the most banal setting.
It's so funny that you mentioned that. I love to hear that, because Joey Ramone is one of my favorite celebrity sightings of all time, because it happened. I was sitting in a coffee shop in the Flatiron district, and this was probably 2000, 2001 maybe. And the coffee shop was closing early for a children's birthday party, balloons and everything. And as I was leaving, he arrived for the party, and a bunch of kids ran up to him and they were like, "Uncle Joey!"
Yeah. And again, I'm sure he was still full Joey character, but yeah.
Oh, full. Yeah.
Now, have you been, despite having I don't want to say chaos, but just having the kid and your husband at home all the time, able to focus on reading, viewing anything, or are you pretty much distracted and occupied throughout the day?
It's honestly about the same as it's always been, because we're, in spite of how spread thin we are, is that a sentence?
Yeah.
We're also saving time. We're also saving time in commute. I'm sure you feel that in the tri-state area as well, or I don't know what your commute was like.
I work out of home, so it's great. I work downstairs, so I'm way ahead of everybody on the getting accustomed to work from home vibe. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. LA especially. Commute time is
there's no soccer practice on a Saturday morning for her, and I'm not going out to do stand-up shows at night. So I actually am still finding time to read, blessedly. I found myself reading short form, which is typically I I'm a lifelong fan of Harper's Magazine and tend toward nonfiction in general, but especially these days when the reading can just come in little spurts. I've really been enjoying my Harper's subscription.
Mm-hmm.
There's a one piece in particular that was so moving. It's by Aishin Hutchinson. Mm-hmm. And I was not previously familiar with his work. I'm excited to seek out his poetry after reading this, but it's a memoir essay essentially about, he went to the rock churches in Lalibela in Ethiopia and draws parallels between this experience and growing up in Jamaica. And, because he's a poet, the essay is just full of really specific diction choices. It's really beautiful. I love Harper's. I feel like, unlike, maybe, for example, the New Yorker, writers for Harper's are really allowed to have more of their own voice and style. Mm-hmm. There doesn't seem to be as much of a Harper's editorial mold that every story gets poured into. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the house style sort of thing. Yeah, I get you. With the New Yorker writers I've recorded with over the years, I'm sure they'd be irate that we said that there was an editorial style that denuded them of their voice. But, again, it's not like they're listening, so it's okay.
Well, I don't mean to suggest that
no.
fully, but Harper seems even more free. I'll put it that way.
Now, what was your Vanity Fair history? Did you begin during the Graydon Carter times or later? I thought I saw in your archives you went back, but
I first started writing for them right when I got to Sewanee, because there was a piece in the New York Times that there was some quote that struck me as so strange and funny about manners being like dead on the roadside or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. And so I wrote up this humor piece about two sort of very well-mannered and well-intentioned Southerners. It was specifically about the New York Times piece was specifically about Southern manners, about these two well-intentioned Southerners who wind up in grave physical danger because they can't dispel of their manners.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I came to pitch it to Sarah Ball, was an editor there at the time, who's a wonderful person and editor, and she loved it. And I guess they were publishing humor on their digital site then. I don't think they still are, but that's how I kind of got started, and then moved into more kind of traditional culture writing from there, which is mostly what my non-creative freelance work is arts and culture writing. Although I've always thought that arts criticism and memoir are in many ways the same. I think you're looking at, sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, you should check out, or you may already know him, Daniel Mendelsohn. I did a podcast with him a few months ago, did a book called An Odyssey. He's got a new collection now called Ecstasy and Terror, where he thinks all of those are arbitrary lines, and every piece of criticism he does eventually involves some scene of him weeping. So he always manages to integrate the personal and the aesthetic. So yeah, I get where you're coming from.
That's interesting.
I'll zap you a link to him after this. So.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, you're as a narrator, you're present when I'm reading a work. It's inherently personal narrative, the experience of me reading it. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I think about the fact that when you're doing memoir, you're looking at a story that's already happened, that's already been written, so to speak, and finding, you're looking at it, trying to find metaphors and themes, and you're trying to figure out what it means. And of course, that's not always the way one should approach art, but that is sometimes how I approach art. And so that's always felt like a parallel to me.
Do you find yourself looking at the pandemic in that sort of, we'll say, artistic manner? And I don't mean it in a devaluing the horrible human tragedy of what's going on, et cetera. But do you find yourself looking at this and trying to see, metaphorical aspects of what we're doing?
Definitely. And I wonder if that's healthy or not, because I think the way in which I do it is to some degree a defense mechanism. And I think this is why I do journalism. I think I step out of a situation. I think I'm very good at stepping out of a reality. If that's an uncomfortable conversation at a cocktail party and I just immediately start peppering the person with questions, that's one example. But to be able to pull yourself out of a situation and analyze it is healthy in some ways, but it's also putting up barriers. And this is one of the things I'm exploring in the memoir I'm currently developing. And so I do tend to step outside of my pandemic experience, and then I tend to encourage myself to snap back into it and maybe just think about it later.
Place you want to visit, a place you haven't been able to visit because of quarantine, self-isolation, social distance.
North
Restaurant,
Carolina.
bookstore. Oh, okay. You want to get the hell away from LA.
Well, I was supposed to be in North Carolina in May. I was supposed to be in Italy as well in May for a wedding, which has been postponed, sadly. Restaurant. I'm very eager to be in a restaurant. There's so much caregiving happening right now for people who have kids, or even if they don't. We outsource so many aspects of our lives, and there's nobody to really do anything for you right now. We're all sort of doing everything for ourselves. We're all homesteaders all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. So the idea of being in a restaurant and just like pointing at words on a menu and then someone brings me an experience sounds hedonistic.
And yet, it's a weird thing. And actually, does this have any going through the fires in LA in recent years? Does this carry any parallels to that at all, and that whole experience, or did you manage to get away before those were really an issue?
Yes and no. I mean, we were close to the fires just by virtue of being in LA, and we're all sort of going through it in that way. But what's so unique about this pandemic is that it's touching everyone in the world. Mm-hmm. And the fires did not affect me personally at all. I was able to sympathize instead of empathize, I guess.
I get you. Yeah, that's why I wondered whether there was that same degree of being stuck, or if you had more flexibility, more mobility, I guess, than we have
Definitely.
now.
Yeah, we live pretty close to the city center. So although a couple of the hills here, our neighborhood's pretty undeveloped, and a couple of the hills here did spark up and do on occasion spark up. I mean, people are not supposed to be living in
That's
Los
what
Angeles.
I discovered from my first trips there. I was driving around like, I don't know how this city developed or evolved, because it just keeps sprawling and sprawling. You're going through all these hills and it's just not what I'm used to from the Northeast, and I'm sure not what you were used to from North Carolina to begin with.
Mm. And reading Joan Didion doesn't make you feel any better about it.
No, it does make you feel like this can all be converted to art really well, but it
Yeah.
requires a writer like Joan Didion to pull that off. And that's,
Right.
that is one of those moments of, yeah, that's great writing that I would never be able to approach. That it's always great when you come across those and deal with your own limitations, I guess. But anyway, maybe it's just me and my low self-esteem as a writer. Were there
No,
any...
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page about her.
Yeah.
So, binging on either TV, movies, or reading. You mentioned the short fiction and working through Harper's. Other pop cultural things you've just been kind of absorbed by during this?
Well, we definitely watched The Tiger King.
Everybody has that answer. I'm the only person who didn't see it yet.
I tend to be drawn toward cultural moments like that. When everyone's doing it, I want to participate. I'm kind of a goon in that way. And sometimes, you turn it on and you say, oh, okay, I get it. And then you turn it off. But that show is riveting.
Okay.
It is. I can't tell you how many times my husband and I would look at each other and just go, what the hell is happening? Is this real?
There's a quote I read of some German documentary maker who just said it's unfair that Americans get to live in America because the documentary makers in America have this as their backyard, basically. There's always crazy shit like this story happening somewhere. Usually Florida, but
Well, and this Tiger King is very Florida, even though the main location is Ohio.
Yeah, that's the thing. You look at it and just think Florida, which again is biased, but it's Florida.
Do you have any TV recommendations for me?
Schitt's Creek.
Oh,
that's yeah.
beautiful.
Amy and I binged through that and then caught up with the final season and managed to groove through we managed to go weekly for the last 6 or 7 weeks, which is weird when you're used to watching something 2 or 3 episodes a night. I also basically just lived up to the fact that I am a 49-year-old white man and watched Ford versus Ferrari on Friday. Yeah, I just thought, I saw the trailer for that and thought, I'm a middle-aged man. That movie looks fucking tremendous. That was this terrible moment for me where I just had to cop to exactly who I am and where I am. And that was it. And it lived up to it. It's not high art. It's just a really good movie at least for a middle-aged guy like me. I was like, wow. Yeah,
sometimes that's what we need.
Yeah, that was it. It wasn't high art. It wasn't, like watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or something. It was just a good period movie. Great performances, beautiful to look at. I was fine.
All right.
Otherwise, but, we started Cheers all over again.
Oh, that's fun.
200, 300 episodes of that.
There you go.
That will keep us occupied.
But otherwise, I've been binging Joseph Campbell. I pulled it back down off the shelf from. I was a religious studies major in college, so the most fun thing about it, I mean, I just love myth and I love Joseph Campbell, but the most fun thing about rereading it right now, first of all, the deep time thing I mentioned earlier, just to think, oh yeah, we've been doing this forever, we humans, but reading my marginalia from when I was 20 and the things I connected with then are so different from the things I connect with now. And that's also been encouraging. Another form of deep time, just a little more shallow.
For many, many years, I've refused to write in my margins for that reason. I am desperately afraid of because I keep a list of every book I finished since I started college, which was 1989. And, there are things in those early days that I am quite embarrassed about. And I'm pretty sure that if I kept margin notes, I'd basically just hang myself out of fear that someday somebody would open those, like, Gil wrote this, it's pretty bad. But, again, I'm filled with guilt for something I've never done.
I doubt that. I bet I'd be very interested in your thoughts on all the books you've read.
I think I have a copy of my old Heidegger here from college. I think I remember like writing in that one because none of us in the class could make any sense of it. So I am interested in going back and looking at Being in Time. But yeah, there was a Pynchon crying of Lot 49 that I scribbled in, and I realized, oh my God, I from there on I just stopped ever writing notes and things. I write stuff down, and I keep a common book on the side, but it's in code, so nobody will be able to read it. I'm just kidding. But I keep it off to the side where, I keep quotes, I keep things that, resonate for me. But otherwise I just dog-ear pages so that years from now I can look back and just wonder why I dog-eared that page. I don't mark anything, and I just look at it like, there was something here. There must have been some line that caught me, but yeah, I got no idea what it is. So it's good catching up with you. That's what I'm saying. It's nice having these moments of deep times.
It's been wonderful to catch up with you. I'm glad to hear you're staying sane. You seem sane.
Yeah, I've been telling people, I hope you stay safe and parenthesis relatively, close parenthesis, sane, because I figure we're all, on some sort of spectrum of almost losing our shit, but we're still keeping it together. Next time, I was supposed to be in LA in June because I had a trade show in San Diego, but that's virtual only now. But next time I get out there, I will let you know, because at a minimum, I should at least see the rusty trailer outside the place.
Yes. I would love it, please.
That was Jane Borden. Go check out her site, janeborden.com, to find her journalism and essays, as well as a link to her essay collection, I Totally Meant to Do That, which I recall as being pretty entertaining. And that profile we talk about on making art during a plague, that came out last month at Vanity Fair, vanityfair.com, and it's a very good piece for the present moment. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this one because I think it's worthwhile reading. Jane Borden is JaneBorden.com. She's also on Twitter as Jane Borden. And we'll be back tomorrow with another COVID check-in. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18, GROTH18 at gmail.com. You can find contact info at our sites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. The latter has a link to the COVID-19 sessions where you can find all of these daily episodes. You can also get them just by subscribing to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, YouTube, wherever the hell else it is, all of which you can find at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Now, I'm using Zencastr.com to record these remotes, and that's spelled ZENCASTR, so no final E. Zencastr is $20 a month, but my Patreon supporters more than cover it, especially since I'm no longer spending money on parking, tolls, subway trips, the coffee that I get usually before setting foot in a guest home, etc., for all of those in-person episodes that I do. I probably will have to increase my podcast hosting service by another $5 a month also, because it has a limit to the amount of episodes you can, or amount of memory you can upload every month, and I am pretty close to blowing through that, and it's only April 18th. Anyway, I'm doing fine with money, but if you have something you can spare, then go find the Patreons, the tip jars, Kickstarters, Indiegogos, GoFundMes, whatever, for the artists and writers you like, and show them some support. I don't need it. They do. Also, if you don't want to contribute to people individually, donate to charities, your local food bank, maybe some of those pay it forward programs with masks and respirators and that sort of stuff. Just do what you can. That's all I ask. Now, I am Gil Roth. It is April 18th, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going. Stay safe and wash your damn hands.